Happy holidays, everyone. Even though it's the holiday season, the show must still go on. So we are back with another episode of Sparring Decks featuring NBN versus Anarch. Now, even though the holiday season is well underway, there's also a lot of discussion going on underway. Specifically between myself and Tris, we were looking at the NBN deck that I initially proposed, the New Angela Soul deck, and Tris expressed that this might not be the best deck for newer players because it feels oppressive. It is true that the runner could feel like they're being suppressed by scarcity of resources, a very strong current that basically renders a lot of resources unplayable, but the main argument against this New Angela Soul deck is that the outcome could sway very heavily based on whether the corp draws their scarcity of resources early or not. As such, I do agree that this is something that should not exist in sparring decks, this high variance element hinging on a single card. Therefore, I think as a suitable compromise, I'm going to introduce this alternative NBN deck that hopefully will provide a slightly more enjoyable time. Unfortunately, it has to be in controlling the message. So veterans will know that this identity has typically been associated with oppressive game styles because it is a very strong identity ability and is typically associated with asset spam, one of the arguably not so fun aspects of Netrunner. However, I try to make this as enjoyable as possible while still being on par with the other corp decks. So, you can give this a try and see whether players enjoy it or not. Also leave feedback for me because honestly, there are not that many NBN archetypes out there that can compete with the power level of the other three corp factions. So I'm basically having to resort to this. So, might as well explain this deck while I'm here. So for the newer players, this is a tag-based attrition deck. Attrition meaning that you are trying to wear and tear down the runner over time. And you do so with your powerful arsenal of assets combined with your identity ability, which you can see below the deck list. You force the runner to lose even if they are playing aggressively or passively. If they run all your assets and trash them, they are taking a massive resource hit because not only do they have to pay for the assets, they have to clear the tag that controlling the message ability will deal to them, thereby wearing down on their economy. If the runner chooses not to contest your assets, however, they will concede the economic advantage to you because your assets give you a lot of money. This will allow you to activate your C-Source card, an operation that deals tags to the runner proactively, and which in turn allows you to land your tag punishment. Now, this phrase tag punishment refers to punishing the runner when they have tags, and we will talk a bit about that a little later on. Strengths and weaknesses of this CTM deck. This identity forces the runner to selectively trash your assets or upgrades. You can't trash them all. That is pretty obvious because the runner simply doesn't have the economy to do so. So they have to choose wisely, and if they choose the wrong assets, they could be in a lot of trouble. This is combined with a very resilient agenda suite. You can see the agendas at the bottom of your screen. There's Global Food Initiative, an agenda that is worth 1 less point to the runner, as well as Quantum Predictive Model, an agenda that the runner cannot really steal if they are tagged, because if they access it while tagged, it goes to your score area instead. So these agendas are very defensive because it's very hard for the runner to get agenda points off these two agendas. On the flip side, however, because these are defensive agendas, they do not give you any proactive benefit when you score it. Therefore, in that sense, when you score your agendas, they're typically mostly blank. When you score agendas, they are just worth their agenda point values, nothing much more. Another big weakness of CTM is that it typically cannot really punish early central pressure. This is because your ice is rather... You are running relatively few ice compared to the glacial decks such as HB, and when they steal your agendas, you can't really punish them for it. Now, this deck, in more competitive versions of CTM, they typically run this card called Hard Hitting News. You can see that with a cross on your screen at the bottom. I chose not to include this card in this deck because otherwise it will be too powerful for the runners in the sparring deck. But if you want to make this deck more powerful, you should definitely run hard-hitting news, because it shows up this weakness. It punishes early aggressive runners by dealing them 4 tags, which is very difficult to clear. Now we move on to tag punishment. What happens when the runner is tagged? Whether you land a proactive tag via C-source, or whether they end their turn with tags due to misplays, you can punish them with an exchange of information. This is a card that allows you to swap agendas from your agenda pool with that in the runner's agenda pool. So if you imagine one of the nice scenarios, you have a quantum predictive model worth 1 point in your score area, and the runner has a global food initiative worth 2 points. Remember, it's a 3-point agenda, but it's worth 1 fewer point to the runner. Assuming they're tagged, you can then play this exchange of information operation, swapping these 2 agendas. Suddenly, you are now up to 3 points because the global food is now in your score area, and they're down to 1 point because you just gave them the quantum model. This is a net swing of 3 agenda points, so the ability to gain a 3 agenda point lead just by playing this one exchange card is very powerful. Needless to say, this is a useless card if the runner is not tagged, so you want to tag them. Another possible tag punishment is psychographics. You can see that on your screen as well. This works best with agendas such as Project Build, because Project Build can potentially gain an unbounded number of agenda points for you, depending on how many advancement counters you have on it when scored. So psychographics allows you to punish a runner who is heavily tagged with many tags. You can place lots of agenda counters on Project Build in a single click, allowing you to perhaps outright win the game. This is the main reason why, as the runner, you cannot just float tags willy-nilly, right? Okay, some interesting lines of play with this CTM deck. As with the other runner decks, I tried to make some sort of bluffing game possible, and one of the bluffing games that you can play with this CTM deck is an advanced card behind Data Raven. Now, this advanced card, say you double advance it, there are 2 advancement counters on it. There's one of 2 things these could be. It could be a global food that you're trying to score. This is a very big agenda if you can manage to score it, because it's worth 3 points to you as the corp, gets you halfway to your win condition. However, the runner has to be aware that running it might carry the risk of it being a quantum predictive model instead. If they run it, they will have to make the successful run while tagged because of Data Raven, which forces the tag onto the runner. So when they hit it, and it's a quantum predictive model, the agenda goes into your score area instead. So they're doing the dirty work for you. They are making it easier for you to score the agenda because they just stole it for you. As such, the runner typically will have a very tough time making this choice. They have to accurately guess whether it's a global food or a quantum predictive model, with severe ramifications if they make the wrong choice. If they give you a global food and choose not to run it, again, you're halfway to victory. If they run the quantum predictive model, they are losing tempo, they are losing resources running that remote, only to give you agenda points. Alright, we are going to feature the NBN versus Anarch matchup today. As NBN, you want to defend your HQ very well versus Anarch because they have a slew of disruptive cards that can easily disrupt your combo. Your combo being the tag punishment cards that you're holding in your hand, as well as C-Source. This comes in the form of Imp and Bagad, which you see on your screen. These can trash the combo cards from either your R&D or your HQ, which perhaps turns off your tag punishment and prevents you from taking advantage of the runner being tagged. This is a big problem because that means the runner can play more brazenly without worrying about your tag punishment cards. If, for example, all your exchange of informations and all your psychographics are all in the bin, they don't have to worry about those cards anymore, and that's a problem. The other card you have to worry about is Mining Accident. This is a card that forces you to either pay 5 credits or take a bad publicity. Paying 5 credits is a pain, but taking a bad publicity can ruin your long-term game because it makes trashing your assets much cheaper. They pay 1 fewer credit each time they trash your assets, and this can have very serious implications in the long term because you rely so much on your assets being protected by the heavy trash costs and your ID ability. Hence, you always want to have at least 5 credits on hand to pay for the Mining Accident. On the flip side, if you're playing the Anarch deck, This is just generic advice regardless of which identity you choose. Just as a reminder, this deck can work out of any identity. If you we are gonna feature Alice Merchant today, but realistically it can be played out of almost any other Anarch identity. The first thing you must notice is that you have 3 cutlery cards in your deck: the fork, the knife, and pictured right here, the spoon. These are powerful cards that allow you to destroy your opponent's ice. However, you have to be aware that while doing this against CTM, this counts as you trashing their installed cards, and as such will trigger their ability, which deals you a tag. So long story short, if you play this, be prepared to take tags. Sometimes it's good to play this even though you have to receive a tag because they have some really nasty ice, but just be prepared that you need to have a click remaining to clear the tag. Now, one powerful card in your arsenal in this particular matchup is Hacktivist Meeting. This is the current that allows you, that basically forces the co-op to trash a card from their hand randomly if they res assets. This is a surprisingly disruptive current to have, so you want to keep this up as long as possible, because this will severely disrupt the asset game and give you enough time to shore up your economy so that you can trash those assets when they actually choose to res it. Alright, let's see this matchup in action. This is rather, this is not traditional Netrunner in the sense that it's not that much based on ice and fortified remotes. This is more of an attrition game. So perhaps watching this might give you some insight as to how more experienced players handle this matchup. Right off the bat, we play very differently compared to typical corporations that try to ice the centrals before doing anything else. With CTM, it's typically the case that you want to actually see assets early rather than ice. This is why I kept my opening hand with 2 assets that you see me playing right now. My opponent will not be able to trash them both. They have pretty high trash costs and they have to deal with my identity ability on top of it. So I feel pretty good about this, and I'm going to defend one of the assets as well. That asset is Daily Business Show, a high value asset that allows me to potentially draw my agendas and then bury them under my R&D, leaving them out of the runner's reach. This is a very powerful ability to have, and it's something that I want to activate right off the bat, hence I res it on turn 2. Alright, so as you see there, I just drew the project view. I am in no position to score it with not enough ice, so it gets buried down into R&D. That's one less agenda I have to worry about the runner stealing. I draw into more ice here, so I'm gonna click for credits. Usually you would want to install the ice, but here I wanted to get some money up. You can see the hedge fund in my hand. I'm ready to play next turn, but my opponent stim hacks the Daily Business Show. Knowing how high value a target it is, I could choose to res the Data Raven here that is protecting the Daily Business Show, but given that they have 9 free credits with which to make this run, I decided it wasn't quite worth it. So I let my opponent through, and they get to kill the Daily Business Show. This was a pretty good move by my opponent, but they took a brain damage, so that is going to limit their options for the rest of the game, being able to end that turn on only 4 cards as opposed to 5. They also swing over to my remote, trash the pack campaign, and play the Hacktivist Meeting. As I mentioned, this makes my future assets harder to res because I'll have to discard a card every time I want to res an asset or upgrade, which is really annoying. So I don't have assets going, which is a big problem. Now my opponent can continue setting up. You notice one smart thing my opponent did there was to trash the pack campaign and the Daily Business Show both in the same turn. By doing so, my opponent only need trigger my identity ability once, because my identity ability fires once per turn. Had they run it on 2 separate turns, they would have to face my identity ability twice and potentially take 2 tags. So that is some efficiency that my opponent is squeezing in by dealing with the assets all in the same turn. They then continue on with an indexing to R&D and stealing a very valuable agenda in the quantum predictive model. Even though it's only worth 1 point to the runner, I'm not happy seeing this, because this agenda is usually one that the co-op can easily get into the score area. Typically, as you find more ice, you will find that your opponent will have a very difficult time making successful runs without taking a tag or 2, which means that any quantum predictive models that they hit will go to your score area. So having stolen this early is a free point for my opponent that they don't have to worry about conceding to me later on, which is pretty good. Now, as the game progresses on, my opponent makes the stunning realization that they actually have an ID ability they can use. They have Alice Merchant, and they have just found their Bagat. These two cards in tandem are gonna cause some serious pressure for me. By running my undefended HQ and then Archives, I'm forced to trash the top card of R&D followed by one card from my hand. This is the start of the end for me, as I find myself unable to keep my combo in hand. I have Seesaws and Exchange of Information in my hand, but I do not have the setup required to perform that combo. I need a small agenda in my score area and a large agenda in my opponent's score area, both of which are not existent. So slowly but surely, I'm going to start bleeding cards from everywhere. You saw here, I defended Archives before HQ because there were no agendas in hand. I slotted the only agenda into server 1, but also importantly, I could not afford my opponent to run Archives and force me to trash either Seesaws or Exchange. But they install an imp and trash my Exchange of Information anyway. That imp allows my opponent to trash any card they access, even if it cannot normally be trashed. That is ridiculous. So knowing that the combo cards in my hand were going to disappear sooner or later, my opponent was going to get into HQ regardless, I played the Seesaws, which would have gone into the bin sooner or later anyway, and started wrecking my opponent's resources. I killed that Bagat. Well, that's all I could do really, and pass the turn over to them. But at least that's one fewer card I have to deal with. And knowing that that's only a one-off in my opponent's deck, hopefully this should slow down the pressure that they apply to me, because if they make too many successful runs with Bagat, a lot of cards will go from R&D into Archives, possibly agendas that will lose me the game. So here, I'm gonna take this opportunity to score my global food that's in my remote, while my opponent was on 0 credits. So that was a very good opportunity. That Seesaws was not that difficult to land because my opponent was playing mostly poor during those few turns, which allowed me to score this food freely, getting me 3 points. But also very importantly, you notice that the hacktivist meeting, the current is no longer in play. It gets trashed when you score an agenda. So now I can start rezzing my assets again without having to worry about trashing HQ cards due to hacktivist meeting. My opponent continues playing very, very aggressively, and this is kind of the Anarch way, playing aggressively and causing lots of chaos and destruction in the process, leaving a trail of trail of shambles in their wake. My opponent runs R&D, and even though I managed to have an ice there, they get through, steal an agenda, and force me to take a bad publicity from mining accident. This is what I mentioned is the last thing you want to do. This makes it harder to keep your assets on the board, and with hacktivist meeting in play once again, my opponent found their other copy of it. It's only going to get harder from here on out. I'm going to score this project build here, and my opponent should not be able to contest it because they're super poor. I have a Red Herrings and a Mumbai Virtual Tour in the remote, so I'm not worried about this project build going to my opponent at all. I'm going to score it here, and this puts me in a somewhat comfortable position. I'm on 5 agenda points to my opponent's 3. So this really puts the pressure on. Just like most of the other co-op decks in this Sparring decks compilation, once you get to match point, 5 points is match point here, because all you need to do is to never advance a 2-pointer to win the game. Never advance meaning that you install a card in a remote, they have to check it, because if it could possibly be the last project build, which is worth 2 points to me, and I can triple advance it if it's on the board to win the game. So basically, they have to always check my remotes from now on, because any of them could be the winning project build. Even though there's only 1 copy left in the deck, they know that that's all it takes for me to win. So my opponent continues playing aggressively on centrals, hoping to get an easy win before I force them to check every single remote, but I'm not going to make it easy at all. I have a lot of cheap ice defending my centrals, and it's super annoying to break. My opponent just ran into my turnpike, which saps 1 credit for them when they encounter it, and then attempts to land a tag via the trace. My opponent says, nope, I'm going to break it with MK Ultra, but that's very expensive as well, taking a lot of their hard-earned money away from them. But they do get some economy down, they have the resources up. So now, passing the turn over to me, I know I need economy as well. So it's time for me to continue setting up my board, and here is where the attrition begins. My opponent is allowing me to get daily business show going. It's an asset which gives me a lot of options, as it allows me to pick and choose which cards I want to keep and bury from my R&D. For example, you see here as I'm about to get a daily business show trigger, I'm gonna see an agenda and psychographics. I don't really need psychographics at all. I do need the agenda, and this is where I can start playing the attrition game. I jam something in the server 1, and they have to decide whether to contest it or not. If they do, they be damned, because there's a Mumbat virtual tour in there that's going to be expensive to trash. If they don't contest it, I score the agenda and come that much closer to winning. So of course they have to go for it, and this is where I can start sapping a lot of their credits. Note that they start this run with 14 credits plus 1 bad publicity. They encounter the Data Raven that I finally res, even though it was down there for the longest time. They arrive at the bottom of the server with a tag, and I'm going to res the red herrings here. This is going to make it more expensive for them to steal this AR enhanced security, knowing they can't run the server twice. First time running to trash the red herrings, and second time running the server, rerunning the server to steal the agenda. They instead suck up the 5 credits required to steal the agenda, and then proceed to trash the red herrings, triggering my identity ability. Now, usually you do want to fire the CTM trace to land a tag on them, but I chose not to here. If I allowed the CTM trace to fire, my opponent would sink their money into it, therefore leaving them too poor to then trash the last card in the server, which is the Mumbat Virtual Tour. I wanted them to trash the Mumbat Virtual Tour, which would put them so poor that they are unable to remove the tag at the end of their turn. This is because they had 6 credits remaining after trashing the red herrings, and it cost 5 credits to trash the Mumbat Virtual Tour, which has a trash cost of 5. So by choosing not to fire the CTM trace, my opponent was then forced to access the Mumbat Virtual Tour and trash it, which left them with 1 credit left at the end of the run and only 1 click remaining, meaning that they couldn't clear the last tag that they took from the Data Raven. So yeah, not all abilities in the game are like this. CTM's ability is optional because it has the word may written in the text box. Unless the word may is written, generally abilities are not optional. They must fire whenever they trigger. So my opponent's now tagged. This is an interesting juncture for me. I can potentially disrupt their board state by trashing their resources. So not only is my opponent the proponent of chaos and destruction, I can perform some disruption myself if my opponent chooses to take tags in a situation such as this. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do other than simply trashing the resources. And even then, we are just talking about only 1 resource, the Daily Cast with 6 credit tokens on it. I'm going to spend a click and 2 credits to use the ability to trash my opponent's resource while they are tagged. So I spend 1 click and 2 credits to deny my opponent 6 credits. It works in my favor, but even then it slows me down by quite a bit. You notice my credit pool is very low. At only 3 credits, I can hardly threaten anything, which gives my opponent some time to set up, to get the economy going healthy again, and it's back over to me, where my daily business show draws me into 2 agendas, both 1-point agendas, 15 minutes and quantum predictive model. This is quite awkward, and one of the downsides of daily business show is that I actually have to bury one of these, in a situation where I want both of these in my hand. Quantum predictive is almost certainly a free agenda for me, because I have a Data Raven res on the remote, making it very easy to score. 15 minutes on the other hand is a 2 advanceable agenda, meaning that I can install double advance it on my turn to score it straight from hand. I want both of these agendas because in conjunction with each other, they'll give me the 2 points I need to win the game. As you can see here, I went for the quantum predictive model instead, putting the 15 minutes at the bottom of my deck. This means that I will not draw it for a pretty long time because it's at the bottom, right? So the quantum predictive model that is now sitting in the remote will get me to 6 points, but I need to find a way to get my 7th point. This is typically achieved by the 15 minutes, but as I said, it's at the bottom of my deck. It's gonna be pretty hard to find it. So here my opponent plays a mining accident, attempting to drain my credits. I simply take the bad publicity quickly And my opponent thinks, oh wait, this might be the game, because don't forget, there's another project build, a 3 advanceable agenda that is worth 2 points to me. This could be the game for me. So my opponent was forced to run the remote and check to make sure that it wasn't the game-winning build for me. I was able to dish my opponent a tag here. That tag will be the key to allowing me to score this quantum predictive model. So yeah, this is gonna work out very well in my favor, but I'm still not out of the woods just yet. At 6 agenda points and without access to 15 minutes for quite a long time, I need to find a way to score that final agenda point. It's getting really close here. As Trish says, I suck in chat. So I'm up 6 points to my opponent's 4. I look like I'm in a pretty good shape. My opponent is poor, they are tagged, and I get to trace my opponent with controlling the message here. Where they trash my red herrings, and they now are stuck with 2 tags at the end of their turn. But what can I do with these 2 tags? I can't really punish them for this. Looking in my bin, I see both exchange of informations are in the bin. I only run 2 copies in this deck, and this deck has no way to get them out of the bin. This means that I cannot win on exchange of information either. So when we talk about games, usually a word that we use is out. And out refers to a line of play which would win you the game. In this case, the number of outs I have in this particular situation would typically be many. I could score the 15 minutes out of hand to win, I could exchange of information to win, but my outs were narrowed down because all the 15 minutes is now at the bottom of my deck and the exchanges are no longer accessible for me. So in this situation, I had very few outs, even though my opponent wasn't very aware of this. To my opponent's point of view, they look like they are in big trouble themselves. They are tagged against NBN, which is not where you want to be, and they are basically forced to check the remote every single time. I inserted something in the remote, they had to go for it even though it turned out to be a useless pack campaign. That sapped away some valuable resources and time from them, because every time they run the remote, they have to spend a David counter, because the wraparound is an end run that can be broken. That has to be broken by either the David or the paperclip that is now in their bin. I draw into my winning agenda the AR Enhanced Security. This is not an agenda that's easily scored, but I need to find a way to get it out. So my plan is to create an impenetrable remote. This is going to be done by fortifying it with a 3rd piece of ice in the Archangel. This is a very annoying ice for my opponent to break. Basically, the only way to do so is to use a David counter, which then will leave them without David counters to break the next piece of ice in the way, the wraparound. Unfortunately, I couldn't place the agenda in the remote in the same turn because I would not have enough money to score it. You notice I'm super poor right now. I only have 3 credits to my name, so I needed to wait 1 more turn for scoring to take place. But of course, this is the beauty of Netrunner, because I failed to consider how the board looks to my opponent. My opponent is grasping at straws now. They know they're so poor. They're trying to get rid of all these tags and are losing so much tempo. They are grasping at straws, and the only way they can win is to keep hammering my remote. And they did it. They basically took a bunch of credits and ran my remote, and I couldn't stop them. They used a David counter to get through the Archangel, and then used a paperclip for the wraparound, as I mentioned, allowing them to get through to the server and steal this 1 pointer. Now, it doesn't win them the game, but it puts them that much closer. We are now 6 agenda points to 5, and yeah, this is as close as it gets, because now a 2-pointer, whether it be the remaining global food initiatives or the final project build, will win them the game. So it's back to my turn. I use a daily business show, and here I realized there's a very interesting thing I could do. I'm going to put the Maryland campaign in the remote. It's not going to really matter. My opponent can't really get to it because of the Archangel that's guarding the server. They do not have any David counters remaining to contest it. But what I'm planning to do here is to use Maryland campaign's often unheard of ability. My opponent still goes for the Maryland campaign, which is pretty insane. But here's the thing. The Maryland campaign has this ability where if it is rezzed and someone trashes it, be it yourself or your opponent, you can actually shuffle it back into your deck. Now, this ability is typically useful for recurring your Maryland campaigns. You use it to get lots of money, you shuffle it back to your deck, and you potentially draw it again sometime later to get even more money. But here, I'm looking at another out. another way for which I can win this game. If I use this to shuffle my deck will no longer be in the same order as it once was, meaning that the 15 minutes that I put at the bottom of my deck with Daily Business Show earlier will not necessarily be at the bottom anymore. In fact, I could easily draw it later on. So this is why you see me overwrite my Maryland campaign here by installing a Mumbat Virtual Tour over it. You can do this even though Mumbat Virtual Tour is an upgrade and Maryland's an asset. I'm doing this firstly to perhaps lull my opponent into thinking that server wants a winning agenda, but also to shuffle my deck. This way, the 15 minutes could potentially be on the top of the deck, allowing me to win off the top of R&D. So they run R&D and access, they found the winning agenda before I could get to it. So yeah, yet another nail biter in the books. I think this game just shows how important it is to get the early match point, because as you saw this game, I got to 5 points quickly, forcing my opponent to repeatedly run that remote. It wasn't even the most taxing remote in the world compared to something like the HB Glacier deck. This remote was pretty trivial to waltz through with just 2 David counters, or even just 1 David counter and 1 credit for paperclip. My opponent could easily check my remote every time, but the tempo it costs them to do that, that's what you really want them to incur. So that is that's how you play a CTM. Even though you can be quite vulnerable early on, you can see how you still have tools to punish an overextending runner. Using Seesaws to trash Bagat was a pretty big move on my part, and rushing out those early points meant that I could continuously dig through my deck to find the solution. Unfortunately for me, I was just a bit too slow on that one. My opponent got into R&D and found their winning agenda before I did. So, interesting game, and I hope you learn a bit more about this rather unconventional CTM deck. Well, get down to playing it. I hope you enjoy it as much as we have. In the meantime, thanks for watching. As always, happy net running. I'll see you next time.